They slipped the ricin into her water bottle while she slept. Measured doses designed to shut down her kidneys within 6 hours. Left her convulsing on the floor of a concrete bunker in the mountains of Kordistan, while they celebrated over encrypted coms. Photographed her writhing body as proof of elimination, and moved to incinerate the evidence. But here's the thing about trying to poison a Navy SEAL system. You better make sure their body actually accepts defeat. Because Chief Petty Officer Zara Blackthorne had spent 12 years conditioning herself to survive what would kill ordinary people. And her iron stomach was about to remind them why SEALs don't die quietly. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. Before we show you exactly how she turned their own biological weapon into their worst nightmare, make sure you smash that subscribe button with notifications on and drop a comment, telling us the most extreme thing you've ever had to power through when your body was screaming at you to quit. Because this story doesn't end with organ failure and a body bag. It ends with a reminder that some people's systems are forged in fires hot enough to burn poison itself. And when you try to kill someone whose body has been weaponized by years of the impossible, you better pray they don't have enough strength left to make you regret it. Chief Petty Officer Zara Blackthorne had consumed things that would hospitalize normal humans, just for breakfast. During Hell Week, she downed salt water until her throat burned raw. In the jungles of Vaelthara, she'd chewed tree bark to stay alive for 6 days. In the Arctic wasteland of Nordmark, she'd melted snow with antifreeze runoff just to have liquid in her system. Her instructors used to joke that her digestive tract was lined with kevlar in spite, but Zara knew it was something more deliberate than genetics. You don't survive SEER training by having a weak constitution. You don't complete underwater demolition courses by letting your body dictate your limits. And you definitely don't earn your trident by accepting that poison in your system means game over. Zara's stomach had been conditioned, trained, hardened through years of controlled exposure to toxins, controlled starvation, controlled everything that could break a human body, down to its component parts, and then build it back. Stronger, the mission to the Kordistan highlands was supposed to be intelligence gathering slip into the remote research facility, document the biological weapons development, extract without engagement. The facility sat perched on a cliff face like a concrete tumor, hidden in mountains so remote that satellite imagery barely picked up the access roads. Dr. Hendrik Voss, the target, was developing weaponized pathogens for the highest bidder. And 3 governments wanted his research eliminated before it hit the black market. Zara infiltrated through the ventilation system, spent 4 hours photographing lab equipment, sample storage, and research notes written in a mixture of technical German and scientific notation that would take analysts weeks to decode. The facility was undermanned, only 6 security personnel, 2 lab technicians, and Voss himself working the night shift. She could have completed extraction without anyone knowing she'd been there. But then she heard the conversation in the main lab, voices carrying through the thin walls as she prepared to leave through the same vent shaft she'd entered. English, accented but clear, discussing not just research but deployment. Active operations, cities, casualty projections. The Lagos test confirmed effectiveness, Voss said, his voice clinical, detached. 96% mortality rate within 72 hours. The Marrakesh sample will be ready for deployment by Tuesday. Zara froze. Lagos, Marrakesh. These weren't theoretical discussions. They were talking about weapons already in circulation, already killing people, already spreading through population centers while the world remained oblivious. She activated her recording device and stayed. The American operative poses no threat, another voice said, security chief, judging by his radio chatter. Even if she discovered the facility, she cannot have accessed the main laboratory. The door requires biometric scanning. Except Zara had been inside the main laboratory for 3 hours. She'd photographed everything, recorded conversations, and documented enough evidence to shut down not just this facility, but the entire network behind it. That's when she made the mistake. A single movement, a shift of weight against the metal ductwork that created one small sound, just a tiny creak of expanding metal dot, but in a facility designed for paranoia. Even tiny sounds get investigated. Within 10 minutes, they'd found her. Within 20, they had her zip-tied to a chair in the same laboratory she'd been photographing. Dr. Vos studying her like she was another specimen for his collection. Chief Petty Officer Zara Blackthorne, he read from her identification. Voice carrying the satisfaction of a man who just solved an irritating puzzle. United States Navy Special Warfare Command. Your government will deny you exist, of course. No one will come looking. Zara said nothing. Standard protocol. Name, rank, serial number. Nothing else. I'm curious, Vos continued. Setting her water bottle, her own bottle. The one from her gear on the laboratory table beside a rack of glass vials. How much do you know about ricin absorption rates in human subjects? Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. He held up a syringe, clear liquid catching the fluorescent light. Extracted from castor beans, refined to 98% purity. In water, it's tasteless. In your bloodstream, it's inevitable. Zara watched him inject the contents into her bottle. Watched him screw the cap back on. Watched him set it within reach like he was offering her a choice. Dehydration will make you desperate, he said, checking his watch. The facility maintains low humidity specifically to accelerate the process. You'll drink. And when you do, your kidneys will begin shutting down within hours. Your cells will stop producing proteins. Your body will consume itself from the inside out. He stepped back, hands clasped behind his back like a professor delivering a lecture. The beautiful thing about ricin, Vos said, is that there's no antidote. Once it's in your system, death becomes a biological inevitability. The only question is how long you'll suffer first. What? Dr. Hendrik Vos didn't know was that Zara Blackthorne's definition of biological inevitability had been permanently altered by years of training that most humans wouldn't survive. What he was about to learn was that when you try to poison someone whose body has been systematically conditioned to process toxins, survive contamination, and function beyond normal human limits, you're not conducting an experiment. You're making a very dangerous mistake. But before we dive into exactly how Zara's iron-forged digestive system turned Dr. Vos's biological weapon into his own death sentence, I need you to do something for me. Hit that subscribe button right now, not later. Not when the video ends, but right now, because what you're about to witness is the kind of survival story that proves human limits exist only in the minds of people who've never been pushed past them. Turn on those notifications because we upload these incredible stories every single day, and trust me, you don't want to miss what happens when someone trained to survive the impossible meets someone who thinks poison equals game over. Drop a comment below and tell us about a time when your body wanted to quit, but you forced it to keep going anyway, whether that was running a marathon, fighting through food poisoning, or just surviving the worst hangover of your life. Because after you see what Zara does next, you'll understand that the difference between surviving and dying isn't always about what enters your system, it's about what your system has been trained to do with it. And here's what I can promise you. In the next few minutes, you're going to watch a woman who was systematically conditioned to process toxins, survive contamination, and function beyond normal human limits, turn a death sentence into a weapon of revenge. You're going to see how 12 years of controlled exposure to everything from spoiled rations to contaminated water creates a digestive system that doesn't just survive poison. It metabolizes it, processes it, and keeps functioning while the people who administered it learn exactly why Navy SEALs don't die quietly. This isn't just about surviving ricin poisoning. This is about what happens when someone who spent years conditioning their body to be a weapon meets someone arrogant enough to think. Biology follows the same rules for everyone. You're about to discover why they call it an iron stomach, and why Dr. Hendrik Voss's next few hours are going to teach him the difference between killing a civilian and trying to poison someone whose body was built to survive what would destroy ordinary people. So buckle in, because Zara Blackthorne's real education is about to begin. Chief Petty Officer Zara Blackthorne had always been different, even before the Navy taught her how to weaponize that difference. Growing up in the industrial wasteland of Millfield, Ohio, where the steel mills had died, but the toxic runoff lived forever, she'd learned early that her body processed things differently than other kids. While her classmates got sick from drinking well water tainted with industrial chemicals, Zara just got stronger. While they couldn't stomach the school cafeteria food that sat under heat lamps for hours, she ate everything and asked for seconds. Her father, a former Marine who worked double shifts at the water treatment plant, noticed it first. "Girl's got a cast-iron gut," he'd tell her mother after watching 8-year-old Zara polish off leftovers that had been sitting in the refrigerator for a week. Nothing makes her sick. Nothing slows her down. It wasn't just about food tolerance. Zara could drink tap water that made adults nauseous, eat gas station sushi without consequences, and recover from stomach flu in half the time it took anyone else. By high school, she was the kid who volunteered to clean up after the science experiments went wrong. The one who could handle dissection labs while half the class ran to the bathroom. Her biology teacher, Mrs. Chun, used to joke that Zara's digestive system was an evolutionary adaptation to modern toxicity. "Some people are canaries in coal mines," she'd say. Zara's the coal mine that trains the canaries. But it wasn't until Navy boot camp that someone put a name to what made her different. During the infamous gut check week, 7 days of consuming progressively more challenging rations designed to weed out recruits with sensitive stomachs, Zara not only survived but thrived. While other recruits were doubled over from MREs that had been expired for months, from water purification tablets that burned throats raw, from emergency rations that tasted like salted cardboard soaked in motor oil, Zara cleaned her plate and asked the instructors if they had anything more challenging. Chief Petty Officer Rodriguez pulled her aside after she consumed a field ration that had sent 3 other recruits to the medical bay. "Blackthorne, what did you eat growing up? Because whatever it was, your system processes toxins like they're vitamins." That's when she learned about SARE training: survival, evasion, resistance, escape. The program that would take her natural tolerance and turn it into a weapon. They taught her to identify edible plants by taste alone, to distinguish between water sources by smell, to consume things that would hospitalize civilians, and extract nutrition from sources that normal people couldn't even touch. During the poison resistance phase of training, instructors introduced controlled doses of various toxins into her system over months, gradually building immunity to substances that could incapacitate enemy forces. They fed her spoiled meat to strengthen her resistance to bacterial infections. They had her drink contaminated water to build immunity to waterborne pathogens. They exposed her to low-level chemical irritants to condition her system against biological weapons. "Your body's like a biological laboratory," her SEAR instructor explained after she successfully processed a dose of staphylococcal enterotoxin that had left seasoned operators bedridden for days. Most people's digestive systems are libraries, organized, predictable, easily disrupted. Yours is more like a foundry. It takes whatever you throw into it and forges it into something useful. The training wasn't just about consuming toxins. It was about maintaining cognitive function while her body processed them. She learned to think clearly while nauseous, to maintain fine motor control while her system fought off deliberate poisoning, to complete complex tasks while her body dealt with everything from mild food poisoning to controlled exposure to nerve agents. By the time she earned her trident, Zara could consume water that would kill most humans, eat rations that had been sitting in desert heat for months, and process biological agents that were designed to incapacitate enemy forces. Her medical records read like a toxicologist's wish list: immunity to 17 different bacterial strains, resistance to 12 classes of biological weapons, and a digestive system that military doctors described as remarkably adaptive to hostile biological environments. Her teammates called her Iron Gut during deployment in Vaelthara, where she'd been the only operator who could safely consume local water sources without purification tablets. Command called her Biological Asset Alpha 7, after she successfully completed a mission that required consuming contaminated food to maintain cover for 6 days while her system processed enough salmonella to hospitalize a village. But Zara understood what the doctors and instructors didn't quite grasp. This wasn't just about having a strong stomach or good genetics. Her body had been systematically retrained to view toxins not as threats, but as challenges to overcome. Her digestive system didn't just resist poison, it adapted to it, learned from it, and emerged stronger. She'd spent years conditioning her liver to process substances that would overwhelm normal human filtration systems. Her kidneys had been strengthened through controlled exposure to compounds that tested their limits without causing permanent damage. Her intestinal lining had developed resistance to irritants that would cause internal bleeding in civilians. Most importantly, her nervous system had learned to maintain function even when her body was under biological attack. She could think clearly, move precisely, and fight effectively even while her system was processing substances designed to incapacitate. Now, sitting zip-tied to a chair in Dr. Hendrik Voss's laboratory, watching him inject ricin into her water bottle with the confidence of a man who thought biology was predictable, Zara felt something she hadn't experienced in years. Not fear, not even concern. Curiosity. She was genuinely curious to see how her iron-forged digestive system would handle a toxin that Voss clearly believed would be her death sentence. Because if 12 years of systematic conditioning had taught her anything, it was that the difference between poison and medicine often came down to dosage, preparation, and the strength of the system processing. Dr. Hendrik Voss was about to receive a very educational lesson in exactly how wrong his assumptions about biological inevitability could be. The Kordistan Biological Research Facility clung to the mountainside like a concrete parasite, its brutalist architecture designed to blend into the rocky cliff face while housing the kind of research that required maximum isolation from civilized oversight. Built into a natural cave system that had been expanded with military-grade excavation equipment, the facility sprawled through 3 levels of reinforced tunnels that burrowed deep enough into the mountain to survive direct nuclear strikes. Dr. Hendrik Voss had chosen this location specifically for its remoteness and natural defensive advantages. The nearest population center was over 200 kilometers away across terrain, so hostile that even local smuggling routes avoided the area. Supply deliveries required helicopter transport through mountain passes that were navigable only during specific weather windows. Communications relied on satellite uplinks that could be severed instantly if the facility needed to disappear from global surveillance. Networks. The main laboratory where Zara now sat occupied the facility's deepest level, carved from living rock and lined with steel plates that created a Faraday cage effect. No electronic signals could penetrate the space without authorized access, making it impossible for outside forces to track what happened inside. Banks of centrifuges hummed against the walls, processing samples in sealed chambers that contained biological agents deadly enough to depopulate entire cities. Refrigeration units maintained precise temperatures for cultures that required specific environmental conditions to remain stable. Voss had designed the space to feel deliberately clinical and intimidating. Stainless steel surfaces reflected harsh fluorescent lighting that cast everything in the sterile glow of an operating theater. The air filtration system created a constant low hum, punctuated by the rhythmic cycling of pressure locks that maintained negative atmospheric pressure throughout the facility. Every surface could be sterilized instantly if contamination protocols required emergency decontamination. But what made the facility truly dangerous wasn't its isolation or defensive capabilities. It was the scope of research taking place inside. Voss wasn't just developing biological weapons for theoretical deployment. He was field testing them in real-world scenarios, using refugee populations and remote villages as unwitting test subjects for pathogens designed to kill efficiently while appearing to be natural disease outbreaks. The Lagos incident had been his masterpiece. A modified strain of hemorrhagic fever introduced into a water treatment facility serving 3 districts of the city. Official records listed it as a natural outbreak of Lassa fever. But Voss's version had been engineered to resist standard medical treatments, while spreading more aggressively than any naturally occurring variant. 73,000 people had died before international aid organizations contained the outbreak, and no one suspected that the pathogen had been artificially enhanced. Marrakesh was scheduled to be next. A weaponized strain of cholera designed to overwhelm local medical infrastructure, while appearing to be the result of natural contamination in the city's water supply. The pathogen would spread faster than traditional cholera, resist standard antibiotic treatments, and cause complications that made diagnosis difficult until the infection had progressed beyond treatment. Voss maintained detailed files on 17 different deployment scenarios, each designed to test specific aspects of his biological weapons, while providing plausible deniability for the governments and corporations that funded his research. He'd perfected the art of creating chaos that looked natural, engineering death that appeared accidental, and developing weapons that could eliminate target populations without leaving evidence of deliberate attack. The facility's security reflected the sensitivity of this research. 6 guards worked rotating shifts that ensured armed personnel remained on duty around the clock. Each carried weapons loaded with ammunition designed to incapacitate rather than kill. Voss preferred interrogating intruders before eliminating them. Motion sensors monitored every corridor, and pressure plates detected unauthorized movement through areas that required specific clearance levels. Dr. Voss himself was a tall, precise man in his late 50s who moved through his laboratory with the methodical efficiency of someone who viewed human suffering as data to be collected and analyzed. His doctoral work at the University of Heidelberg had focused on viral modification techniques, but funding limitations had driven him toward private research where ethical oversight was voluntary rather than mandatory. 23 years of increasingly questionable research had hardened him into someone who could discuss casualty projections with the same detachment most people reserved for weather reports. His current project represented the culmination of everything he'd learned about biological warfare. A modified ricin derivative that could be introduced into water supplies, food distribution networks, or ventilation systems without detection. Unlike traditional ricin, his version had been engineered to remain stable in various environmental conditions while maintaining its toxicity across a wider range of delivery methods. The compound sitting in Zara's water bottle represented months of careful refinement. Voss had tested it on laboratory animals, political prisoners provided by client governments, and volunteers from refugee camps who'd been told they were receiving medical treatment. The results had been consistently fatal within 6 to 8 hours, regardless of the subject's age, health status, or medical intervention. But Voss's research had focused entirely on civilian populations, people whose bodies had never been systematically conditioned to survive biological attacks. His test subjects had been farmers, office workers, students, and refugees whose digestive systems followed normal biological parameters. None of them had spent years building immunity to toxins, pathogens, and chemical agents specifically designed to incapacitate enemy forces. The laboratory's environmental controls maintained perfect temperature and humidity for preserving biological samples, but they also created conditions that accelerated dehydration in human subjects. Voss had calculated that even the most disciplined prisoner would be forced to drink contaminated water within 12 hours of exposure to the facility's deliberately harsh atmospheric conditions. What he hadn't calculated was encountering someone whose body had been systematically retrained to process substances that would kill normal humans. Someone whose digestive system had been conditioned through years of controlled exposure to view toxins not as death sentences but as challenges to overcome. Dr. Hendrik Voss had spent decades perfecting biological weapons designed to kill efficiently and quietly. But his expertise had never included encountering a target whose body had been deliberately transformed into something that could survive what he considered UNSURVIVABLE in the next few hours. He was about to receive a comprehensive education in exactly how dangerous that miscalculation could be. The first warning sign came in the form of silence. Zara had been scanning the laboratory for 43 minutes, cataloging every piece of equipment, every security camera angle, every potential weapon within reach. When she noticed that the constant background hum of air filtration had stopped, not paused, stopped entirely. The negative pressure that kept biological agents contained within the facility had been deliberately disrupted. Dr. Voss was watching her with the patience of a scientist conducting a long-term experiment. He'd positioned himself at a workstation 15 feet away, close enough to observe her deterioration, but far enough to avoid any desperate final attacks. His fingers tapped rhythmically against a metal clipboard as he monitored her vital signs through sensors built into the chair she was zip-tied to. Heart rate, blood pressure, skin conductivity, all feeding data to his computers in real time. The dehydration protocol is quite efficient, he said, consulting readings on his tablet. Humidity has dropped to 12%. Temperature holding steady at 34 degrees Celsius. Most subjects begin experiencing significant thirst within the first hour. Zara said nothing. Her throat was already beginning to feel dry, but that was expected. What concerned her more was the way her skin felt tight across her hands and face. The early stages of dehydration that would progress to dizziness, confusion, and eventually desperation if she allowed it to continue naturally. But Zara Blackthorne had learned to control her body's responses to environmental stress during training scenarios, far more extreme than this sterile laboratory. She'd spent days in desert conditions without water, learning to regulate her fluid loss through conscious control of breathing patterns and metabolic processes. She'd endured Arctic conditions where dehydration occurred through respiration rather than perspiration, training her body to conserve moisture even when her lungs burned from cold. Dry air. The technique was called physiological compartmentalization, the ability to separate automatic responses from conscious control, to override her body's natural reactions when survival required something beyond normal human parameters. She began now, slowing her breathing to reduce moisture loss through exhalation, consciously relaxing muscle groups to reduce metabolic demand, mentally adjusting her perception of thirst to distinguish between actual physiological need and psychological expectation. Voss noticed the change immediately. Interesting. Your heart rate has decreased rather than increased. Most subjects show elevated stress responses by this point. He made notes on his tablet, clearly fascinated by data that didn't match his expected parameters. Military training, I assume. Stress inoculation techniques? Still, Zara remained silent. But her mind was working furiously, processing not just her immediate situation, but patterns that had been bothering her since the moment they'd captured her. The facility's security had been too precise, too coordinated. They'd found her hiding spot too quickly. And most importantly, they'd been ready for her, not just prepared for an intruder, but specifically prepared for her. Someone had known she was coming. The mission briefing had come through standard channels. Intelligence reports about biological weapons research, satellite imagery of the facility, personnel files on Dr. Voss and his research team. Everything had appeared routine until now, sitting in this chair. Watching Voss conduct his experiment with the confidence of someone who'd known exactly what to expect. "You're wondering how we knew you would be here," Voss said, as if reading her thoughts. "The answer is quite simple. Your government told us." Zara's expression didn't change, but her mind began racing through implications. If this was true, if her own command structure had compromised the mission, then extraction wasn't coming. No one would be looking for her. No backup teams would be deployed when she missed her check-in times. Operation Nightshade has been extremely valuable to certain parties within your military-industrial complex, Voss continued, clearly enjoying the revelation. My research provides practical solutions to geopolitical problems that cannot be addressed through conventional military action. The Lagos outbreak, for instance, eliminated a troublesome warlord and his entire power structure without requiring American military intervention. He gestured to the laboratory around them, the equipment humming with quiet efficiency. But you represent a threat to operational security. Your investigation into biological weapons deployment had progressed beyond acceptable parameters. Someone decided that your curiosity had become problematic. Zara processed this information with the cold efficiency that 12 years of military service had trained into her. If Voss was telling the truth, then this wasn't a capture, it was an elimination. She hadn't stumbled into an enemy facility. She'd been delivered to one by her own people. But that revelation also provided crucial intelligence. If her own command had compromised the mission, they would expect her to die here quietly, cleanly, in a way that could be explained as operational casualties. Dr. Voss would file a report describing how an American operative had been neutralized while conducting unauthorized surveillance. The official records would show that Chief Petty Officer Zara Blackthorne had died in the line of duty during a classified operation. Except they'd made one critical miscalculation. They'd assumed that biological weapons would work on her the same way they worked on everyone else. Voss checked his tablet again, frowning slightly at readings that clearly weren't matching his projections. Your hydration level should be dropping more rapidly. The environmental controls are functioning correctly, but your physiological responses are atypical. Zara could feel her body beginning to demand water. Her mouth was dry, her throat felt scratchy, and the constant low-level headache of dehydration was building behind her temples. But these were manageable sensations, discomfort rather than distress. She'd experienced far worse during SEER training exercises that lasted days without any fluid intake. More importantly, she was beginning to understand the psychological component of Voss's experiment. The poisoned water bottle sat 18 inches away, just close enough that she could reach it if she strained against her restraints. The placement wasn't accidental, it was designed to become increasingly tempting as dehydration progressed. The beauty of this particular research protocol, Voss said, following her gaze to the water bottle, is that it removes the variable of forced consumption. Subjects make the choice themselves, driven by biological necessity. It creates clean data about voluntary ingestion rates under controlled stress conditions. But as Voss spoke, Zara noticed something he hadn't mentioned. something that suggested his confidence in the experimental outcome might be premature. The ricin-contaminated water in her bottle had been sitting in the dry laboratory air for over an hour. At these temperature and humidity levels, evaporation would be occurring rapidly. The concentration of poison in the remaining liquid would be increasing with every minute that passed, which meant that if she did eventually drink it, when her body's demands for hydration finally overcame her ability to resist, she wouldn't be consuming the carefully calculated dose that Voss had prepared. She'd be drinking something significantly more concentrated, something that might overwhelm even a digestive system trained to process toxins. Dr. Hendrik Voss was so focused on monitoring her psychological deterioration that he'd overlooked a basic principle of chemistry. And that oversight was about to become a very dangerous problem for everyone in this laboratory. The attack came from outside the laboratory, sudden and devastating. 3 sharp explosions rocked the facility's upper levels, sending tremors through the mountain that cracked ceiling panels and triggered emergency lighting throughout the complex. Voss spun toward his communication console as alarms began blaring, not the steady pulse of facility security alerts, but the harsh, continuous shriek that indicated structural compromise. "Control, what's happening up there?" He barked into his headset, but static was the only response. The external communications array had been severed, cutting the facility's connection to satellite uplinks and outside monitoring systems. Emergency power kicked in, bathing the laboratory in the red glow of backup lighting that made everything look like it had been dipped in blood. Through the chaos, Zara heard something that made her blood freeze. Voices in the corridors above, speaking English with American accents. Not rescue, something far worse. The same voices she'd heard during her briefing 3 days ago, discussing operational parameters and acceptable casualties. Her own people had come to clean up loose ends. "Sir, biological containment is compromised on level 2, came a crackling voice through Voss's radio. "Unknown substances released into ventilation system. Recommend immediate evacuation." Voss's face went pale. Level 2 housed his most dangerous research-modified anthrax strains, weaponized hemorrhagic fever variants, and experimental nerve agents that could kill through skin contact alone. If those containers had been breached deliberately, then whoever was attacking the facility wasn't trying to capture it, they were sterilizing it. A new voice came through the communication system, clear and authoritative. "Dr. Voss, this is Colonel Morrison, United States Army Medical Research Command. Your research has been classified as a biological security threat. We are implementing immediate containment protocols." Zara recognized the name. Colonel Morrison had been present during her mission briefing, sitting quietly in the back of the room while intelligence officers outlined her objectives. He'd asked pointed questions about her biological resistance training, about her ability to survive in contaminated environments. At the time, she'd assumed he was concerned about her safety during the mission. Now she understood he'd been planning her elimination. "This facility will be sealed and neutralized within 30 minutes. Morrison continued. "All personnel and research materials will be destroyed to prevent biological contamination from reaching populated areas." This is not a negotiation. Voss frantically began entering commands into his workstation, trying to access emergency protocols, but his screens displayed only error messages. The facility's security systems had been compromised from the inside. Someone with administrative access had locked him out of his own laboratory. "You bastards," he snarled into the radio. "We had an agreement. My research was protected under congressional oversight." Morrison's response was coldly professional. "Congress was never informed of the Lagos deployment. When we discovered you'd been conducting unauthorized field tests, your protection was terminated. The ricin research alone constitutes a war crime under international law." The sound of gunfire erupted from the upper levels at the sharp crack of precision shooting. but sustained automatic weapons fire. Voss's security team was fighting back, but they were outnumbered and outgunned by forces that had clearly studied the facility's layout in advance. Zara realized with crystalline clarity that she was about to die not as a prisoner of enemy forces, but as collateral damage in her own government's cleanup operation. Morrison's team would pump chemical agents into the facility's ventilation system, seal all exits, and file reports indicating that a terrorist biological weapons laboratory had been neutralized before it could threaten American interests. Official story would describe how Chief Petty Officer Zara Blackthorne had heroically infiltrated the facility and died preventing biological weapons from being deployed against civilian populations. She'd receive posthumous honors and a flag-draped coffin containing enough genetic material to fool standard identification procedures. But as explosions continued to rock the facility and toxic gas began seeping into the laboratory through compromised ventilation ducts, Zara found herself facing the choice that would have been unthinkable an hour ago. The ricin-contaminated water bottle sat within reach, now concentrated to lethal levels through evaporation. Drinking it would mean accepting certain death within hours as her organs shut down systematically. But refusing it meant dying immediately as Morrison's chemical agents filled her lungs and nervous system, unless her iron-forged digestive system could accomplish something that Dr. Voss's research had deemed impossible. Voss stumbled backward as smoke began pouring through the air vents, his face a mask of panic and betrayal. "They're going to kill all of us," he gasped, clutching his tablet as if data could somehow save him. 20 years of research destroyed because some politician decided it was politically inconvenient. The laboratory's containment doors began cycling shut, massive steel barriers that could seal the space against biological contamination but would also trap anyone inside. When Morrison's team released their chemical weapons, Voss rushed toward the emergency manual override, but his hands were shaking too badly to enter the access codes correctly. "The neutralization agent will take 12 minutes to reach lethal concentrations," Morrison's voice announced through speakers that had been activated remotely. "All personnel have that long to reach designated safe zones. This facility will then be permanently sealed." Zara strained against her restraints, testing the zip ties that held her to the chair. Military-grade polymer, designed to tighten under pressure rather than break. But the chair itself was standard laboratory furniture, not designed to contain someone with her training. She shifted her weight, feeling the chair's joints strain under force applied at precise angles. One armrest showed hairline cracks where the plastic metal support brackets. If she could generate enough leverage, the sound of approaching footsteps echoed through the corridor. Outside, Morrison's cleanup crew, moving methodically through the facility with chemical detection equipment and sealed breathing apparatus. They would reach this laboratory within minutes, photograph the scene for their reports, and ensure that no evidence survived to contradict their official narrative. Dr. Hendrik Voss would die believing his biological weapons were unstoppable. Colonel Morrison would file reports indicating successful neutralization of a terrorist threat. And Zara Blackthorne would become another classified casualty in a war that most people didn't know was being fought. But they'd all made the same fundamental mistake that had doomed this operation from the beginning. They'd forgotten that iron doesn't break under pressure. It gets stronger. The chemical agent hit Zara's lungs like liquid fire. Morrison's team had pumped some kind of respiratory irritant through the ventilation system, not immediately lethal, but designed to incapacitate anyone without proper protective equipment while they completed their sterilization of the facility. Each breath felt like inhaling ground glass mixed with industrial solvent, and her vision began to blur as her body's natural defense mechanisms tried to protect her airways by flooding them with mucus. Dr. Voss collapsed first, clutching his throat as his respiratory system went into shock. His carefully controlled laboratory environment had become a gas chamber, and his years of working with biological agents hadn't prepared him for chemical warfare. He crawled toward an emergency oxygen tank mounted near his workstation, but his coordination was failing rapidly as the agent attacked his nervous system. Zara felt her body beginning to shut down in ways that 12 years of conditioning hadn't prepared her for. Her SEER training had included exposure to tear gas, pepper spray, and various crowd control agents, but this compound was military-grade, designed to incapacitate enemy forces quickly and completely. Her lungs burned with each shallow breath, her throat constricted until swallowing became impossible, and her muscle control deteriorated as the chemical attacked her peripheral nervous system. The irony wasn't lost on her. After surviving biological weapons research, systematic poisoning attempts, and environmental extremes that would kill most humans, she was going to die breathing toxic air while zip-tied to a laboratory chair. Her body's legendary resistance to ingested toxins meant nothing when chemical agents bypassed her digestive system entirely and attacked her respiratory tract directly. But as consciousness began to fade around the edges, Zara made a decision that would have seemed insane to anyone who didn't understand how iron gets forged under pressure. She stopped fighting the chemical agent and started fighting the restraints instead, using the last of her motor control to create leverage against the chair's weakest structural points. Her right arm jerked violently against the zip tie, not trying to break the polymer binding, but using it like a fulcrum to stress the chair's armrest where plastic met metal. The force sent agony shooting through her shoulder, but she felt something give a tiny crack in the joint that held the armrest to the frame. Again, harder this time, using her body weight to multiply the force even as her vision tunneled and her breathing became shallow gasps. The chemical agent was shutting down her nervous system systematically, but muscle memory and desperate determination kept her moving even as conscious control slipped away. The armrest snapped, not clean, but enough. The chair's structural integrity collapsed on the right side, allowing her to slip the zip tie down the broken plastic until her arm came free. Her fingers fumbled with the remaining restraint as chemical burns spread across her throat and chest. But training kicked in, the same training that had taught her to function underwater when her lungs screamed for air, to operate equipment when her hands were numb from cold, to complete missions when her body insisted it was impossible. Her left arm came free just as footsteps reached the laboratory door. Morrison's cleanup crew, wearing full chemical protection suits and carrying weapons designed for close-quarters elimination rather than capture. Through the red haze of emergency lighting and toxic smoke, she could see them moving with the methodical precision of operators who'd done this before. Clearing techniques adapted for biological warfare. Scenarios. Zara rolled off the collapsed chair and crawled toward the one thing in the laboratory that represented both certain death and possible salvation. The water bottle containing concentrated ricin that Dr. Voss had prepared for her execution. Her hands shook as she unscrewed the cap, not from fear but from the neurological damage that Morrison's chemical agent was causing throughout her system. The liquid inside had evaporated down to perhaps half its original volume, leaving behind a concentration of poison that would overwhelm any normal human's biological defenses within minutes. But Zara Blackthorne's body had been systematically trained to process substances that shouldn't be survivable. Her liver had been conditioned through controlled exposure to metabolize toxins that would destroy normal organ function. Her kidneys had been strengthened to filter compounds that would cause immediate renal failure in civilians. Most importantly, her digestive system had learned to treat poison not as a death sentence, but as a challenge to overcome. She drank it all. The ricin hit her system like a biological earthquake, Every cell in her body screamed as the toxin began its deadly work attacking ribosomes, preventing protein synthesis, beginning the cascade of organ failure that Dr. Vos had described with such clinical precision. Pain erupted from her stomach and spread through her torso as concentrated poison flooded her bloodstream faster than her conditioned liver could process it. But something else happened that neither Vos nor Morrison had calculated. The chemical agent in her lungs began interacting with the ricin in her digestive system, creating a biological feedback loop that her trained immune system recognized and began to combat. Years of controlled exposure to multiple toxins simultaneously had taught her body to prioritize threats and allocate resources accordingly. Her respiratory system, already compromised by chemical burns, began to shut down in ways that actually protected her from further gas exposure. Her digestive tract, flooded with concentrated poison, triggered emergency protocols that redirected blood flow away from non-essential organs and focused her body's defensive resources on metabolizing the ricin before it could complete its deadly work. Outside the laboratory, Morrison's team was setting charges designed to collapse this section of the facility permanently. They'd found Dr. Vos unconscious near his workstation and confirmed that the biological weapons research had been contained. Their mission parameters didn't include recovering survivors, just ensuring that no evidence remained to contradict their official reports. But inside the laboratory, something unprecedented was happening. Zara Blackthorne's body was doing something that medical science would have declared impossible. Processing lethal doses of both chemical and biological agents simultaneously while maintaining enough function to remain conscious. The ricin should have shut down her kidneys within an hour. The chemical agent should have paralyzed her respiratory system within minutes. Instead, her iron-forged physiology was adapting, compensating, and fighting back against toxins that were designed to be UNSURVIVA. Dr. Hendrik Vos had been wrong about biological inevitability. Colonel Morrison had been wrong about acceptable casualties. And in the next few minutes, they were both going to learn exactly how dangerous it could be to underestimate someone whose body had been systematically transformed into a weapon designed to survive. What would destroy ordinary people? The iron heart was still beating, and it was getting angry. The pain was extraordinary. Not the sharp agony of physical injury or the burning sensation of chemical exposure, but something deeper, a cellular-level assault that felt like her body was being dismantled from the inside out. The ricin was doing exactly what Dr. Vos had promised, attacking her ribosomes, preventing protein synthesis, beginning the systematic shutdown of organ function that should have been irreversible. But Zara had felt this before. Not ricin specifically, but the sensation of her body being pushed beyond normal biological limits while her mind remained clear enough to function. During advanced SEER training, instructors had introduced controlled doses of various biotoxins to teach operators how to maintain cognitive function even while their bodies were under severe biological stress. The key wasn't preventing the damage, it was learning to work through it. She closed her eyes and reached inward. Not to fight the poison, but to find the center of control that 12 years of conditioning had burned into her nervous system. Pain was just information. Organ stress was just data. Her body might be shutting down, but her will remained operational, and will could override biology if applied with sufficient precision and discipline. The first lesson from her biological warfare, instructors echoed in her mind. Your body will lie to you. It will tell you that damage equals defeat, that pain equals incapacitation, that toxins equal death. Your job is to separate sensation from capability and keep functioning until the mission is complete. Zara began with breathing. Shallow, controlled inhalations that minimized further chemical exposure while maximizing oxygen efficiency. Her lungs were damaged from Morrison's gas, but they were still functional enough to support essential brain activity. She couldn't run or fight, but she could think, and thinking was the foundation of everything else. Next came circulation. The ricin was flooding her bloodstream, but her cardiovascular system was still pumping. Her heart might be struggling, but it hadn't stopped. She consciously slowed her pulse through meditation techniques that reduced her metabolic demands while maintaining blood flow to essential organs. Every heartbeat was precious now. She couldn't waste them on panic or unnecessary exertion. Then came the most critical part: neurological override. Her peripheral nervous system was under attack from both chemical and biological agents, but her central nervous system, the part that controlled conscious decision-making, was still operational. She compartmentalized the sensory input, acknowledging the pain without allowing it to overwhelm her cognitive processes. The technique was called biological dissociation, the ability to separate her consciousness from her body's automatic distress responses. She'd learned it during underwater torture simulations, where operators had to maintain mental clarity while their bodies underwent controlled drowning. The principle was simple: the mind could function independently of physical sensation, if trained properly. As Zara reached this state of controlled detachment, she became aware of things that panic would have obscured. The rhythm of Morrison's team moving through the facility, clearing rooms with mechanical efficiency. The sound of Dr. Voss's labored breathing as he lay unconscious near his workstation, still alive but failing rapidly. The electronic beeping of laboratory equipment that continued monitoring biological samples even as the facility collapsed around them, and something else. A sound that didn't belong: the quiet hiss of pressurized gas being released from a concealed valve somewhere in the laboratory. Voss had activated something before losing consciousness. Some kind of emergency protocol that wasn't part of Morrison's plan. Zara forced her eyes open, fighting through the neurological interference from the ricin, and spotted a panel near Voss's workstation that was blinking red. Emergency biotoxin release. The same biological agents that Morrison's team had been trying to contain were now being pumped into the laboratory's air supply, but this wasn't random. Through her chemically blurred vision, Zara could see that the release was targeted, coming from vents that led directly to the corridor where Morrison's team was operating. Voss had triggered a final failsafe that would expose the cleanup crew to the same weaponized pathogens they'd come to destroy. The irony would have been amusing under different circumstances. Morrison's soldiers, protected against chemical weapons but not biological ones, were about to encounter anthrax variants and hemorrhagic fever strains that had been engineered to resist standard medical countermeasures. Their mission to contain biological weapons would become their cause of death. Zara realized that this development also created an opportunity. If she could maintain function long enough to reach that control panel, she might be able to redirect the biological release toward the facility's main ventilation system. Morrison's team would be forced to evacuate rather than complete their sterilization mission, buying her time to escape before the ricin finished its deadly work. The plan was insane. Her body was already shutting down from concentrated poison. The chemical agent had damaged her respiratory system beyond normal function. Moving across the laboratory would require physical exertion that might accelerate her organ failure. But remaining stationary meant certain death, while action at least offered the possibility of survival. Zara began to move, not walking. That was beyond her current capabilities. Instead, she used a combination of controlled crawling and tactical movement that conserved energy while covering ground. Each foot of progress cost her tremendously, but she'd learned during survival training that the human body could function far beyond its apparent limits. When survival required extraordinary measures, her liver was struggling to process the ricin. But it hadn't stopped working entirely. Her kidneys were under severe stress, but they were still filtering waste from her bloodstream. Her heart was beating irregularly, but it was beating. And most importantly, her mind remained clear enough to execute complex plans, even while her body underwent systematic poisoning. The control panel was 15 feet away. At her current rate of movement, accounting for the progressive effects of organ failure, she estimated she had perhaps 8 minutes before the ricin overwhelmed her biological defenses completely. 8 minutes to cross 15 feet, access Voss's emergency systems, and redirect enough biological agents to force Morrison's evacuation. Behind her, she could hear voices in the corridor, Morrison's team, communicating through their protective equipment as they prepared to seal this section of the facility permanently. They had no idea that their target was still conscious, still moving, still fighting back against toxins that should have killed her 20 minutes ago. Dr. Hendrik Voss had been wrong about biological inevitability. But he'd been right about one thing: there was no antidote for ricin once it entered the bloodstream. The difference was that Zara Blackthorne didn't need an antidote. She just needed 8 more minutes for her iron-forged body to prove that some hearts don't stop beating until the mission is complete. Zara reached the control panel as her kidneys began to fail. The diagnostic readings on her internal biological status would have sent most people into panic, blood pressure dropping, heart rhythm becoming irregular, liver enzymes spiking as organ function deteriorated under the ricin's systematic attack. But 12 years of training had taught her to view physical degradation as tactical information rather than cause for alarm. Her body might be shutting down, but her mind remained clear enough to execute complex operations. The panel's interface was in German, but the symbols were universal enough that she could decipher the basic functions: emergency biotoxin release controls, atmospheric pressure regulation, ventilation system routing, all the tools she needed to turn Voss's final gambit into her own weapon of retaliation. Her fingers trembled as neurological damage from the ricin affected her fine motor control. But muscle memory guided her through the sequence of commands. She activated the main biological containment breach protocol immediately. Alarms began shrieking throughout the facility as weaponized anthrax, modified hemorrhagic fever variants, and experimental nerve agents flooded the ventilation system. Not just the laboratory level where Morrison's team was operating, but every corridor, every room, every hiding place throughout the complex. The biological agents that Voss had spent years perfecting were now spreading through the facility's air supply with lethal efficiency. Through the laboratory's communication system, she could hear Morrison's voice cutting through the chaos, professional calm beginning to crack. "Command, we have biological containment failure. Repeat, we have uncontrolled pathogen release throughout the facility. Requesting immediate medical evacuation protocols." But Zara wasn't finished. She accessed the facility's external communication array, the same system that Morrison's team had supposedly severed, and began broadcasting on emergency frequencies. Not a call for help, but something far more dangerous to Morrison's operation: a detailed transmission documenting everything she'd discovered about Operation Nightshade, the Legas deployment, and the planned Marrakesh attack. Her voice was hoarse from chemical burns. Her speech slurred as the ricin affected her nervous system, but the words were clear enough. "This is Chief Petty Officer Zara Blackthorne, United States Navy SEAL Team 6. I am transmitting from the Kordistan Biological Weapons Facility. Coordinates 42.7 north, 35.1 east. American military forces are conducting unauthorized elimination of biological weapons research that has been used against civilian populations with congressional oversight knowledge." The transmission went out on multiple channels, simultaneously: military emergency frequencies, international distress signals, and civilian aviation bands that commercial aircraft would monitor. Even if Morrison's people tried to suppress the recording, enough copies would exist across different monitoring stations that the truth would eventually surface. Morrison's response was immediate and predictable. "Blackthorne, this is Colonel Morrison. You are compromised by biological agents and chemical exposure. Your transmission contains classified information that threatens national security. Cease broadcasting immediately. Zara keyed the microphone again, forcing her failing respiratory system to support one more crucial statement. Colonel Morrison, you are conducting an unauthorized biological weapons cleanup operation to conceal war crimes. Committed under Operation Nightshade, Dr. Hendrick. Voss has deployed weaponized pathogens against civilian populations in Lagos, Nigeria, resulting in 73,000 deaths. Marrakesh, Morocco, is scheduled for similar attack using modified cholera variants. Static filled the channel for several seconds before Morrison responded, his professional composure completely abandoned. You're poisoned, Blackthorne. Ricin and chemical exposure. You'll be dead within the hour, regardless of what you transmit. Stand down and we'll provide medical evacuation. During one particularly intensive session, Holloway had attempted to use pharmaceutical intervention to reduce Sophia's psychological defenses. He had claimed that she was showing signs of depression and anxiety that required medical treatment, prescribing medications that would have significantly impaired her cognitive function and emotional control. Sophia had refused the medication, citing religious objections, but she understood that future refusal might not be accepted so easily. The pressure from other inmates was also intensifying. Queen B. Rodriguez had begun orchestrating increasingly sophisticated tests of Sophia's resolve, using information that suggested she was receiving guidance from sources outside the normal prison hierarchy. The challenges were designed to force Sophia into situations where she would have to reveal the full extent of her capabilities or accept defeat that would destroy her position within the facility's social structure. The most significant challenge had come in the form of Maria Santos, a new arrival who had been strategically placed in Sophia's path during what should have been a routine interaction in the library. Maria was a former military intelligence officer who claimed to have been convicted of selling classified information to foreign buyers. She approached Sophia with an offer to share intelligence about security vulnerabilities within Blackwater, information that could potentially be useful for any escape attempt. Sophia's training had taught her to be suspicious of anyone who offered assistance without clear motivation, and Maria's approach had raised multiple red flags. Her knowledge of security procedures was too detailed for someone who had only been at the facility for a few days. Her background story contained inconsistencies that suggested fabrication, and her interest in Sophia's plan seemed more focused on gathering information than providing genuine assistance. The interaction with Maria had been a turning point in Sophia's understanding of her situation. She was clearly being subjected to sophisticated psychological operations that involved multiple layers of deception and manipulation. The question was whether these operations were being conducted by the prison administration, by outside agencies using Blackwater as a testing facility, or by hostile forces that had somehow infiltrated the institution. Elena's financial analysis had also revealed disturbing patterns in the facility's medical and disciplinary records. Inmates who showed signs of resistance or who possessed valuable skills were often subjected to extended periods of medical treatment that resulted in significant changes in their behavior and capabilities. The treatments were documented as standard psychiatric care, but the outcomes suggested more aggressive interventions that might include experimental drugs, psychological conditioning techniques. They're not just holding people here, Elena had explained during one of their conversations. They're changing them. Some inmates leave here fundamentally different from who they were when they arrived, and not in ways that suggest successful rehabilitation. The revelation had prompted Sophia to conduct her own investigation into the facility's operations, using skills developed during intelligence-gathering missions to map the relationships between staff members, identify unusual patterns in inmate movement, and document security procedures that seemed designed for purposes beyond standard corrections. Her findings had confirmed Alina's suspicions, Blackwater was operating as something far more complex than a simple federal prison. The most disturbing discovery had been the existence of a separate wing of the facility that didn't appear on any official blueprints, and that was accessible only to staff members with special clearances. Sophia had observed several inmates being escorted to this area during irregular hours, and she had noted that some of these individuals never returned to the general population. When she had inquired about their whereabouts, she had been told that they had been transferred to other facilities, but there were no records of such transfers in the administrative systems that Alina had been able to access. Sophia's investigation had also revealed sophisticated surveillance equipment that went far beyond what would be expected in a correctional environment. The facility was equipped with biometric monitoring systems that could track stress levels, emotional responses, and even detect deception during conversations. This information was being collected and analyzed by staff members whose background suggested expertise in psychological operations rather than corrections. Breakthrough in Sophia's understanding of her situation came when Alina managed to access financial records that revealed the true source of Blackwater's funding. The facility was receiving substantial payments from a consortium of government agencies and private contractors that were coordinating activities under the umbrella of something called Project Nightfall. The payments were structured to support operations that included psychological research, technology testing, and what the documents euphemistically referred to as human resource development. "You're not here by accident," Alina had told Sophia after reviewing the financial data. "Someone wanted you in this specific place, under these specific conditions, for reasons that are probably connected to your military background and the circumstances of your conviction. The question is whether they're trying to break you down or build you up for something else." The realization that her imprisonment was part of a larger operation had profound implications for Sophia's escape planning. If outside agencies were monitoring her progress and manipulating her environment, then any escape attempt would need to account for opposition that extended far beyond the prison's normal security measures. She would be facing enemies who understood her capabilities, who could predict her likely strategies, and who might be prepared to counter her moves before she made them. But the revelation also presented opportunities. If Sophia was being held at Blackwater for purposes related to Project Nightfall, then the people controlling the operation might have reasons to facilitate her escape under the right circumstances. The challenge would be determining what those circumstances were and how she could manipulate them to her advantage. As Sophia lay in her cell that night, listening to the sounds of the prison settling around her, she understood that she was facing a situation far more complex than anything her SEAL training had prepared her for. She wasn't just fighting to escape from prison. She was fighting to escape from an operation that involved some of the most sophisticated intelligence and psychological manipulation capabilities that the government possessed. The steel bars and concrete walls of Blackwater were only the most visible barriers containing her. The real prison was constructed from lies, manipulation, and institutional power that extended far beyond anything she could fight with physical force alone. But Sophia had learned during her military career that the most formidable enemies often created their own weaknesses through overconfidence and complexity. And she was beginning to identify cracks in the seemingly impenetrable system that held her. The war for her freedom was about to begin in earnest. And Sophia was finally beginning to understand the true nature of the battlefield on which she would be fighting. The gray dawn light filtered through the reinforced windows of cell Block D as Sophia completed her morning routine with mechanical precision, each movement calculated to maintain the physical readiness that would be essential for what was coming. It had been 10 weeks since her arrival at Blackwater, and the facility had settled into a deceptive calm that she recognized as the precursor to significant action. Her intelligence gathering had reached a critical mass. Elena's financial analysis had revealed the scope of the conspiracy surrounding her imprisonment, and the psychological pressure from the administration had intensified to levels that suggested an approaching climax. The catalyst for the final confrontation had arrived 3 days earlier in the form of a new directive from Deputy Director Blackstone. Sophia had observed the unusual activity among the administrative staff, encrypted communications at all hours, additional security personnel arriving under the cover of routine transfers, and modifications to the facility's electronic systems that suggested preparation for something far beyond normal correctional operations. Elena's access to financial systems had been suddenly restricted, and several inmates who had been providing Sophia with intelligence about facility operations had been transferred to other institutions without explanation. Dr. Holloway's psychological evaluations had become increasingly aggressive, incorporating techniques that bordered on interrogation rather than therapy. During her most recent session, he had attempted to use pharmaceutical enhancement to break down her psychological defenses, claiming that her continued resistance to treatment indicated dangerous mental instability that required immediate intervention. Sophia had been forced to submit to blood tests and neurological examinations that were clearly designed to assess her physical and mental condition for purposes that had nothing to do with medical care. They're preparing for something, Elena had warned during one of their final private conversations. The financial authorizations I've seen suggest a major operation is being planned, and the timeline indicates it's happening soon. Whatever Project Nightfall is really about, you're approaching. Zara managed to nod slightly, acknowledging both the information and the unspoken reality that survival remained unlikely despite the medical intervention. But she'd accomplished something that mattered more than her individual survival. The broadcasts she'd transmitted from the facility were already spreading through intelligence networks, triggering investigations that would prevent future biological weapons attacks. The Lagos operation that had killed 73,000 people would face international scrutiny. The planned Marrakesh deployment would be stopped before it could begin, and the network of government officials, military personnel, and private contractors who'd enabled Operation Nightshade would face prosecution for war crimes. As the helicopter flew toward Germany and the medical facilities that represented her only chance of survival, Zara Blackthorne understood that she'd achieved something unprecedented. She'd turned her own execution into a counterattack that would save thousands of lives and expose biological weapons programs that most people didn't know existed. Her body might be dying from ricin poisoning, but her iron will had proven stronger than poison, stronger than betrayal, and stronger than the people who'd tried to eliminate her as a security threat. Dr. Hendrik Voss had been wrong about biological inevitability. Colonel Morrison had been wrong about acceptable casualties. They'd both learned that some Navy SEALs don't just have iron stomachs, they have iron hearts that keep beating until justice is served. No matter what toxins are flooding their systems, the mission was complete. Everything else was just a matter of whether German doctors could work miracles with what remained of her iron forged physiology. The doctors at Landstuhl Regional Medical Center had never seen anything like Zara Blackthorne's case. Her medical charts read like something from a biological warfare research facility rather than a standard patient file. Ricin poisoning at concentrations that should have caused death within hours. Chemical burns throughout her respiratory system that should have prevented breathing. And organ damage that should have been incompatible with consciousness, let alone survival. But she lived, not easily. For 6 days, her body fought a war against toxins that continued circulating through her bloodstream despite aggressive medical intervention. Her kidneys shut down completely, requiring continuous dialysis to filter waste that her organs could no longer process. Her liver function dropped to levels that made survival statistically impossible. Yet somehow her iron-forged physiology continued, operating on reserves that medical science couldn't explain. Dr. Elizabeth Hoffman, the lead toxicologist overseeing her treatment, became fascinated by Zara's case from both medical and military perspectives. Her body has been systematically conditioned to survive what would kill ordinary humans, she explained to the international team of specialists who'd been assembled to study her recovery. 12 years of controlled exposure to toxins, pathogens, and chemical agents created biological adaptations that we're still trying to understand. By the second week, Zara was breathing without mechanical assistance, though her voice remained hoarse from chemical burns that had scarred her throat permanently. Her kidney function began returning gradually as damaged tissues regenerated through processes that defied normal medical expectations. Most remarkably, her liver had somehow continued processing ricin metabolites, even while operating at minimal capacity, gradually clearing the toxins from her system through sheer biological persistence. The nickname spread through the hospital staff before it reached the media. The Iron Lady of Landstuhl, a patient who'd survived biological and chemical warfare attacks that would have killed trained soldiers, then lived to testify about war crimes that most people couldn't imagine. Nurses whispered about the American SEAL who'd been poisoned with concentrated ricin and lived to tell Congress exactly what had happened to 73,000 people in Lagos, Nigeria. The hearings began while she was still in intensive care. Broadcast live from Washington as congressional committees demanded answers about Operation Nightshade and the biological weapons programs that had operated without proper oversight. The evidence she'd transmitted from Voss's laboratory provided the foundation for investigations that would eventually result in criminal prosecutions, policy reforms, and international treaties governing biological warfare research. Colonel Morrison faced court-martial proceedings for conducting unauthorized elimination operations against American military personnel. Dr. Hendrik Voss, who'd survived the facility's contamination but suffered permanent respiratory damage, was extradited to The Hague to face war crimes charges for deploying biological weapons against civilian populations. The entire network of government officials, military contractors, and private researchers who'd enabled Operation Nightshade found themselves under investigation by agencies ranging from the FBI to international human rights organizations. But the most significant impact wasn't legal, it was operational. The exposure of biological weapons deployment in Lagos triggered emergency medical interventions that contained similar outbreaks in 3 other cities were weaponized. Pathogens had been deployed as natural disease emergencies. Thousands of lives were saved by early detection and treatment protocols developed specifically to counter engineered biological agents. 3 months after her evacuation from the Kordistan facility, Zara was cleared for limited duty and transferred to Naval Medical Research Command headquarters in Maryland. Her official assignment was biological warfare countermeasures specialist, a position created specifically to utilize her unique combination of survival experience and toxin resistance in developing defensive protocols for other special operations personnel. But her real role was something more significant. She became the human proof that biological weapons weren't invincible, that properly trained and conditioned personnel could survive attacks that were designed to be unsurvivable. Her recovery protocols were studied, replicated, and adapted into training programs that would protect future operators from similar threats. The press conferences were carefully controlled, but her testimony before closed congressional sessions became legendary among military personnel who understood what she'd accomplished. Not just surviving biological and chemical warfare attacks, but turning her own execution into a counterattack that dismantled an entire clandestine weapons program. They started calling her Iron Heart officially after President Harrison presented her with the Navy Cross during a ceremony that couldn't be fully publicized due to ongoing national security investigations. The citation read simply, "For extraordinary heroism in the face of biological and chemical warfare attacks, resulting in the exposure and prevention of war crimes that threatened international security." But among SEAL teams, the nickname carried deeper meaning. It represented not just physical resilience, but the kind of moral courage required to expose corruption within your own command structure, even when doing so meant accepting almost certain death. Iron Heart became synonymous with the principle that some missions were worth completing regardless of personal cost. Could you drink concentrated ricin and survive through sheer biological conditioning like Zara did? Would you have the presence of mind to turn your own poisoning into a weapon against the people trying to kill you? Let us know in the comments below. I read every single one, and your thoughts always amaze me. If this story reminded you that the strongest iron is forged under the most extreme pressure, smash that like button and subscribe with notifications on. Share this video with someone who needs to. Remember that sometimes the most dangerous person in the room is the one everyone thinks is already defeated. And since we upload incredible stories like this every single day, your next mission is already waiting. Click one of the videos appearing on your screen now to discover another story of someone who refused to accept that biological limits were absolute limits. I'll see you tomorrow with a brand new tale of human resilience that proves some hearts are literally too iron to break. Until then, remember, when they try to poison you, make sure they understand the difference between killing a civilian and trying to eliminate someone whose body was built to survive the impossible. The Iron Heart keeps beating until justice is served. Always. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.